It is known that even Caucasians were considered undesirable by the ideologists of the Third Reich, despite the fact that Hitler's Aryans found a place for the Japanese and Italians in their ranks. But of course, it was Jews, Gypsies, and even everyone who resembled them who were the most undesirable. Jews were rounded up in the concentration camps, but first they had to be delivered there. They were transported in inhumane conditions. First was loading into the train. Hundreds of people were piling up on each railway platform, so it was extremely overcrowded. The threat of being killed by a burst from a machine gun kept them together in tight, orderly ranks. They were not allowed to take all their belongings. After all, in such conditions with full luggage, there would not be enough space for everyone. The delivery of cargo to the death factories became especially relevant in August 1941 and became part of the final solution to the Jewish question. At that time, the bases of the concentration complexes were completed, with the main infrastructure being built by the prisoners themselves. Trains were sent there from all corners of the territories conquered by the Nazis, from the Atlantic to the most western Soviet regions, containing at that time slightly more Jews and Gypsies, such as Moldova, Bukovina, Volyn, Galicia, Odessa, and others. It was necessary to load a lot of prisoners and to do it quickly, regardless of any basic requirements for the transportation of people, both in the physical and moral aspects. Hence, sad consequences were not long in coming. The tragedy of the Holocaust victims was already evident in the process of filling the trains. The procedure was more reminiscent of loading livestock, since no one took into account the division into families. If there was no room in one carriage, the rest of the family was simply shoved into the next one. This is confirmed by the memoirs of rare people who survived the entire Holocaust. Travel information. People were not told where they were being taken. They were explained that they were going to special settlements. Each passenger was charged 2 pfennigs, German currency, for travel. And this is only for a 1 kilometer. Knowing the stinginess of the Germans, the so-called passengers would begin to panic if they were given a free ride. And they would certainly understand that they were being taken to be killed. In such a case, the processes would have been disrupted and the crowd could have trampled both itself and the SS forces. Transport equipment. To deliver future prisoners to zones of various types of extermination, the German Nazis used Kriegslocks. These were locomotives with 10 and not 6 as usual driving wheels. Such compositions were much more powerful. For example, they could carry 10% more cargo than regular trains. Large load means fewer trips. Fewer trips means less cost for coal for the locomotive and less work for the armed guards. The Germans were saving well here. All carriages and Kriegslocks were painted red when they were used to transport people. The only amenities that were provided were a floor of hay, left over from the cows. Unsanitary conditions. According to the recollections of some of those transported, the Kriegslocks did not stop for days, so people had to find their own ways to relieve their needs. Men fenced off the corner of the carriage with a large blanket, bedspread, sheet, etc., cleaning it to the something from above. People relieved themselves in buckets. It was possible to pour out their contents only at some railway stations. But since 100 people were placed in one carriage, there simply weren't enough buckets. For comparison, in normal times, only 10 cows could be placed in such a carriage. On average, each person had a square of 50 by 50 centimeters. To reach the so-called toilet, they had to squeeze through the crowd. It was okay to stand in such condition, but even sitting down was problematic. In fact, the Germans planned to fill the carriage with 50 people, but sometimes they pushed in up to 150. Now imagine the smell, especially when we're talking about the summer month. And we want to repeat that the shipment of the main batches of people started in August. Even before the first urination and defecation, people began to suffocate from the smell of sweat and released gases. Also, these corrals were closed tightly with simple and effective locking devices. There were also sick people whose illness was not regarded by the Germans as a defect. Such unfortunates were awaiting execution. Hay, previously smelling only of mold, quickly absorbed the smell of urine, and each time the whole space became more and more saturated with urine. It was terrible. Of course, none of the soldiers thought to bring water in order to wash off what did not fit into the bucket. There was almost no water until the very end point, and when it was, people fought for water. Thirst and hunger. Involuntarily, travelers managed to hide valuable things in junk. There were watches, cultural valuables, items made of semi-precious metals, as well as gold and silver. Only in exchange for this could people get food or a bucket of water at the train station from locals or police officers. Moreover, the Germans did not bother themselves with obtaining drinking water, believing that the people being transported could use the contents of any reservoir closest to the station. Often the water smelled like mud. People with weak stomachs later vomited, which added to the bouquet of carriage aromas. As provisions, voluntary commercial suppliers from the station could also give almost anything. Vegetable peelings or animal feed, for example, a lot of similar things. There were also decent people. People like a certain Rudolf Werber at stations where there were red carriages tried their best to give the poor fellows drinking water. But these men quickly realized that such volunteering threatens the enthusiasts with death. When there were not policemen but regular SS men standing near the carriages, they warned the volunteers that they would shoot them for any object handed to the prisoners, even a jug of water. And this was exactly what Rudolf Werber originally planned to do. Mortal cold. In winter or late autumn, people managed to catch such a cold in these few days that someone ended up getting not only a sore throat or the runny nose, but also pneumonia. People put on everything they had in their suitcases and bags, but it did not save them from cold wind, especially those with poor health and the elderly. Panic. So they were driven in complete darkness and in terribly cramped conditions. A suffocating smell made anyone thirsty, but there was nothing to drink. During the day it was unbearably hot, and at night it was terribly cold. In these circumstances, the children fell asleep only tired and hoarse from crying. Pregnant and elderly people, having lost the strength to whine and scream from hunger, fainted. Many fell dead on the third or fourth day of this hellish trip. In the height of summer, the smells were completely unbearable. It was really terrible. Only a few of the female carriage dwellers had the strength not to panic. Incredibly cramped conditions. Imagine what it was like for the gypsies, accustomed to freedom and wide spaces which they crossed mainly on horseback. Claustrophobia is a mild description of the state of being in this horrible situation. Even people who were accustomed to living in cramped conditions had all their limbs go numb from uncomfortable positions. By the way, some gypsies were no strangers to such trips. Back in 1936, because of the Olympics, they were removed from all cities in Germany, so that guests could admire how pure the core of the future Reich was. In those rare moments when the sliding doors opened, the red carriage people pushed each other for a place on the edge in order to take a breath of air. The same thing happened in case of dispensing water. Interaction. The organizers and performers of such trips did not set out to achieve even the most primitive comfort for the passengers. Therefore, they had to save themselves. The faster some authoritative leader emerged within the mass of the doomed, the greater the chance they had of surviving or at least arriving healthy. Strong men tried to prevent conflicts, as a result of which the number of passengers decreased even faster. The Germans didn't care. On the contrary, they were amused by all sorts of skirmishes. It was necessary to distribute food exchanged for valuables and watches, control the toilet, and do anything possible to extinguish panic. Experienced mothers tried to distract their children from this hell. The conditions under which Jews and gypsies were transported did not leave passengers with any illusion about the convenience of their future lives. Therefore, many decided to flee at the first opportunity, rejoicing at the machine gun fire in the back after the fourth day of the trip. Often, upon arrival at Auschwitz, and especially in the death of winter, up to 500 passengers arrived dead. Since November 2007, the memory train has occasionally embarked on a 3,000-kilometer tour.